Welcome to Tea Time with Talent Acquisition, the podcast aimed at fostering knowledge and sharing stories within the vibrant talent acquisition community. I'm your host, Eden, and for the next hour or so, I'm going to be joined by a head of talent acquisition that's currently leading a dynamic team across both Berlin and London, whilst redefining hiring strategies that focus on strategic approaches. With over a decade of experience spanning both the tech giants like Amazon, as well as innovative startups like her own current team, she brings a wealth of knowledge in the talent acquisition space, change management, and recruiting operations. Her unique perspective on adaptability and her passion for empowering recruiters to embrace broader skill sets makes her the perfect guest for today's topic. To explore how we as talent acquisition individual contributors and leaders can thrive in today's evolving talent landscape. So when you're ready, grab your favorite tea or coffee if you prefer, and join me in welcoming today's guest, Head of Talent Acquisition with the team at Moss, Célia Sauthier. So thank you so much for joining.
Nice. I'm good. I'm happy to be here at Eden.
I'm glad. Like I said, your perspective on what makes a good recruiter in the current market is where kind of we've led into this conversation. We're going to go into the nitty gritty of it and kind of your own take and own spin to hopefully help improve, people who are actively looking today, people who are maybe looking to transition or simply just develop their own skill sets. And the title of this is, becoming more adaptable. So we'll get into that in a moment, but I just want to kind of peel it back. Head of talent acquisition, right? You've got your team around you, and you can be biased. I'm happy for you to be biased on here. But what makes a high-performing recruitment team in your perspective?
I think, based on my experience, I'd say, especially now at Moss, with a small agile team, what's really key here is what I said before. It's around agility. So
Hmm.
I look more for skills that are going to help the individuals or the team pivot, or expand their scope versus specific, backgrounds or experiences. So for me, it's like very core skills, problem solving, communication, resilience. Like those are just some of the ones that I think help you build a team that can adapt to changes. I've been
Hmm.
with Moss for 3 years now, and we've had to make quite a few changes in like ways of working, priorities. And so the ones that have been able to pivot have these core skills versus specific backgrounds or experiences.
Mm.
My experience.
Well, that leads quite nicely into actually what we're talking about, which is, the ability to be adaptable. So when you use that phrase into your team, what are you specifically referring to? I know you've just alluded to it slightly there, but what does it mean today? And I guess how does it differ from what, we might have seen 5, 6 years ago in talent acquisition?
Yeah, I think it's important to bring it back to the context of TA. I've also been in companies where there was like hyper specialization.
Yeah.
Your experience was very important, and we were building like very specialized and segmented, like fragmented teams. But the recent years have kind of shown us that that has its limits, and when you're kind of like boxed into a specific kind of set of roles you're working on, or like your scope is very limited
Hmm.
to certain kind of tasks or responsibilities, it's then a lot harder for you to kind of show your impact or your relevance to a different set of roles, a different context, a different kind of environment or stakeholders. And we've had to adapt, and it's come with like a lot of downsizing of teams. And when you're less, you kind of have to do a lot of things that you've never done before. I'm sure in a lot of cases, people have become a bit more of like a jack of all trades. Like, oh, I started in tech, but now I'm doing non-tech, or I'm doing whatever the business
Yeah.
needs. And so for sure, that context is forcing a lot of teams to be a lot more agile, and flexible. And it's also showing in some stats. Like right now, I think most companies are looking for generalists versus, just a sourcer or just an RC or just a closer. My experience at working at Amazon, you kind of had like an RC, a sourcer, a closer, and then
RC, just to check, just was the
recruiting coordinator. Sorry,
cool.
yeah, recruiting
No,
coordinator.
that's fine.
So the scheduling, like that whole
Yeah.
life cycle was really split into like sourcing, scheduling, closing, and then employer brand, and all of that was very segmented. But right now like the last numbers are like 74% of teams will favor like the generalist, the full life cycle
Hmm.
recruiters. So that's coming, and if people are not experiencing it now or have experienced it, I think it's going to continue to impact TAT's teams. So there's a forcing mechanism, and I think we all have to kind of recognize that it's there, and figuring out where maybe we're not as generalist as we could be.
Okay. So, I mean, you're literally answering my question next to me already, so which is good to hear. So I'm sitting in the camp of I'm a specialist, right? I only do tech. Well, mostly only do tech. So I put myself in that area because I think from the external perspective, and please correct if I'm wrong, I feel like you would use me more as a specialist when you don't have necessarily the capacity at that time to take on that specialist role. That's my opinion. I think that probably a lot of my colleagues would feel the same. But on the internal side, I totally see it. I think there's a lot more, especially on the startup scene, there's a lot more focus towards people that can kind of just dive in and understand a recruitment process, but then take that to different levels, different types of positions.
Yeah.
But if somebody is sitting in that position now where they are a scheduler, if they're maybe just focused on one specific part, you kind of mentioned developing certain skills. How can we start identifying what skills that we should be looking at ourselves from, more of a self-reflective state?
Yeah, I think it starts with like that self-reflection. So look at like the skills that you think are critical for your own
Hmm.
development, or for maybe the business you're working in, or maybe where you aspire to work. And we can talk a bit more after about like my own take on it, but I think you individually can probably recognize like areas where you're doing quite well, and then areas maybe where you're not, or you've kind of not applied those skills. So it's almost like you do your own little skill gap analysis, figure out like where are your gaps, and identify kind of like the one or two that you really want to focus on. You're not going to be able to work on like everything all the time, so think about those that either are maybe like the most critical or important to you, or maybe it's the skills that you have like the biggest opportunity to actually flex or apply in your current environment, because they are environments where it's very easy to say like, hey, I want to get in, like I'm a recruiting coordinator. Also because you're scheduling, you kind of see which roles are maybe more difficult than others, or which stakeholders are a bit difficult. So you could identify some roles where you want to add and source on, and get more context from the recruiter and say like, hey, can I help here? I can see I'm
Hmm.
scheduling a lot of interviews. I haven't seen an offer. But there are environments where it's more rigid. Maybe there's less of that opportunity to do so. So for sure, there's an element of like what you can or cannot do in your current environment. I would also say like there's more often than not opportunities to do that, but where I see people not do that is if they're like slowing themselves down. So doubting yourself and thinking like, oh, I can't ask for this, or I can't get involved,
Hmm.
is also like, I don't know, it could be like an element of like confidence in wanting to like try something you've never done before, or it could be like a real boundary where you've asked and someone said no. But there's a lot of mental blocks involved there, and it's also identifying like how to overcome them. So yeah, do that skill gap analysis, identify like the one or two skills or opportunities that you can work on, and then figure out like how to flex and what's possible. Speak to your manager. I mean, the manager should also support you in your own development, and help you identify ways to stretch outside of that. I mentioned before, like the recruiting coordinator example, like that was actually something that even in a very corporate environment like Amazon happened actually quite a lot. So it's
Hmm.
very accessible for a sourcer to kind of say, I want to get involved on this event or this role, and so I'm gonna yes, spend a bit more time, maybe work a bit more,
Yeah.
but I'm gonna get that skill set. So yeah, that's an example of like how to get started and what to identify.
I think the skill gap analysis is, I mean, crucial. I think that should be a yearly thing minimum that you do about your own career anyway, so you kind of set your own goals. I see it from my own perspective, and this isn't just towards recruitment, sorry, this is now taking it out of TA, sorry to bore everyone a second, but into like the software roles that I hire for. I find a lot of hiring managers are asking for things without asking for them. So let me explain. It's more of the soft skills that I'm seeing way more now. So change management, entrepreneurship, ownership, but they're not putting it on the job description, but
Mm.
they absolutely want those skills, and I have to like pry that out of them and then try and find those. You're nodding away to anyone who's listening. We're on the right lines here, but that's part that I see as well. So these are like buzzword soft skills now. Taking it back to somebody who's maybe a little bit more junior, maybe who's just starting out of our listeners, what can they do where they don't necessarily know what the skills are that they're trying to identify in themselves? You've mentioned speak to your manager, great. You're obviously going to give us something a little bit as well. That's only two sources. Where else can they kind of try to bring out a well-rounded area of knowing what skills to look at?
Um, I mean, there are some research around this. Like, there's LinkedIn comes out with like reports on like the most sought after skills and recruiters. So there's other sources out there also that are like kind of pinpointing some hard and some soft skills that are like more in
Hmm.
demand and how that's like evolving over
Hmm.
time. So those sources of information are also useful to kind of see, okay, well, if this is becoming in demand, like, am I actually well positioned to kind of acquire this knowledge or develop it, knowledge or skills, sorry, or am I not? The manager knows what is I guess the success criteria for your role. So I think it's always an important one. And then these types of podcasts and there's a lot of meetups and communities usually where people are based where there's also a lot of conversation around what kind of what skills are sought after and what a good recruiter may look like in kind of different contexts or environments. So those come to mind in terms of like being able to figure out like what are the skills to focus on. And then there are some that I think will withstand the test of time. They are always important, like I said before, problem solving skills, critical thinking. Some of those skills for me are like they've always been important and they've always been things that I've looked out for myself and for others.
Why are they important then? I mean, take problem solving skill for example in the context of recruitment. Why would you say that's a forever here skill, always an important skill?
Because our job is about solving problems. Like in the end, the problem that hiring is seeking to solve often is like a business problem. And sometimes hiring's not the right solution when you ask enough questions on like why do you need this person? What are
Mm.
they gonna fix? What's the current status? Why has it not worked in the past? And you get a real sense of like what's the business problem at the core. You really get a deeper understanding of what this person's coming in to solve, and if hiring is actually like the right option here. We've hired other people in the past. It's not worked. Well, why? And maybe the solution is actually not hiring someone. It's maybe upskilling in the team, or it's bringing in a consultant, or maybe it's redistributing the responsibilities across the existing team. So I think like when you boil it down, like our jobs are about solving business problems. So that I think is super important. And once you understand like the business problem or what the hire is solving, you also kind of develop all the business acumen and the context
Mm.
understanding that's super critical to a role. But also like aside from that, like we always come across problems and challenges. I don't know, it's your response rates are dropping, or you've been sourcing for 2 weeks, but no one's making it to final. Like these are all problems. And so focusing on like the why. So why are they dropping? Okay, maybe it's because the final interview is the biggest problem. Okay, so why? Actually, people are dropping out. Oh, okay, why are they dropping out? So it's that like 5 whys of kind of like getting to the core issue and then finding like trying out a solution that's going to address that, and then trying that fast and figuring it fast if it's like helping you or not. For me, it's like the most critical skill to have, and it sounds like very simplistic, like how I'm explaining it right now. But I find that it's very you kind of also have a lot of situations where we're trying to do the same thing over and over, expecting different results, or we're sticking to the solution. So let's try this fix, and we've actually not really looked into the core problem. So for
Mm.
me, it's yeah, it's really kind of the one all be all of recruiting.
So, by the way, that was a masterclass. If anyone hasn't taken like a ton of notes, that was literally a masterclass of driving impact in problem solving, because you gave literally like 15 different examples just there and then about how problem solving is the skill within recruitment. What other skills are you looking for when you're saying you're now kind of looking into your team? And obviously, you're hiring right now when we record this into your talent acquisition function. Little plug there if anyone wants to message her after, feel free. But when we're saying like more of these generalists, then so problem solving, critical thinking, what other skills are you focusing in on?
Yeah, so I would say the other one that I'm looking out for, especially in like a more generalist context, is this like curiosity and, I guess the proactivity piece as well. Like if
Mm.
you're a generalist, there will be a point where you're going to work on a role that you've never worked on before. And if you're not curious and asking a lot of questions and being proactive and looking at, where is this talent? Is it even in Berlin, or is it actually in other locations, or even doing research? Like recently I did this where there was a role, it was new for Moss, and there was a question mark around like where this person should sit in the organization. I was doing research, like very scrappy on LinkedIn, and looking at like competitors or other companies, like how does their org look like, and how are the sales roles organized. And you really only do that, you only get that information if you're kind of looking through LinkedIn profiles, descriptions of jobs, careers sites, and you kind of get a sense of like what are how are other companies structuring like their sales organization. So that proactivity and that curiosity to really kind of go out and like also not take that information for granted, and saying I'm going to do my own research, and I'm going to also be scrappy in my research and use the tools I have, which we don't have LinkedIn Insights. There's a lot of stuff we don't have, but there's other ways you can find that information, um, even in discussing with candidates. So that proactivity, that ability to kind of identify your own knowledge gaps and have a beginner mindset to every role you're working on, also to just not assume that you kind of know what the team is looking for, or exactly kind of where to find these profiles. So yeah, it's really that self-starter mentality, and that curiosity is really important, because once you have like, I think, a solid skill set as a recruiter, my belief is you can work on any role, but you have to have that curiosity, and be proactive in doing your research, and then having a discussion with the manager to say like, hey, this is what I've noticed in other organizations. Like, why are we having this split between our SDRs and our AEs, or how do they hand over customers? So, and you can only do that, I think, if you're proactive with your research and you're curious and you want to learn more than just what are the requirements, what are the nice to haves and the must haves. So yeah, I think that's really key.
Do you think the people that you've been interviewing for your own team then, obviously you're looking out, you're asking certain questions, trying to uncover. Do you feel that recruiters or talent acquisition specialists right now are effectively showcasing these broader skills and how they are interviewing?
Um, Good question. I think my role as an interviewer also is to kind of give people a fair chance to showcase that. So my
Hmm.
role is to ask the questions and the follow-ups that are going to help you bring your best self to the interview and your best examples. But I think when I ask some of these questions, I do get a sense of sometimes there's maybe like I'm sure the examples are there. It's just I think in some instances it's hard to for candidates to figure out how to showcase that effectively, especially let me now that I'm talking about it, it kind of one thing does strike me is there's very little indication of how a specific kind of skill has impacted their role or their business, their results. So it's not that people don't have the skills or they don't have the right experience, but it's like, how do you then tie that back to something that's had impact and you've not just done it for the sake of doing it or done it because it was fun or because someone told you?
Yeah.
It's also tying it back to the impact. And sometimes it's like metrics. You can sometimes, like more often than not, actually measure the impact it's had. But sometimes it's not measurable, but it still must have had an impact. Hopefully it has had, because when we're talking about projects um, or experiences, there's always an effort involved. And so,
Mhm.
what was the impact of what you've just spent several weeks doing, I
Yeah.
think is key and sometimes is often missing in interviews. Yeah.
I see that 100% echoing it from my side. I think the input piece is the part that is missing on the good old STAR acronym. Results great. The result was, you changed the process. What was the impact that that process change made on the company, bottom line, whatever. I also don't disagree with if somebody wants to bring a negative impact to a conversation. I quite like that because then
Yeah.
it shows that this was the impact. It was the wrong impact that we wanted. This is now the learns. So it doesn't always have to be, hey, this is amazing, everything's hunky dory. It
Yeah.
could be actually we lost money because of this. I made a decision. It was a wrong decision. We learned from it. This is what we then did after. It's like that. That comes back down to like accountability and ownership. And I think a lot of these broader skills can kind of bleed into more behavioral based questions and more like value questions and things like that. But as if someone's been proactive enough to organically bring these skills in, I guess it's kind of ticking these boxes in your own mind before you even ask the questions, right?
Yeah, yeah, and just going back to what you said about sharing negative examples, I also actually like that, and I learned that also a lot from my time at Amazon. Is like we give the opportunity for candidates to shine, so don't just ask about tell me about something you've done but failed or tell me about a mistake.
Yeah.
But if there are examples of unsuccessful impact, then it's also interesting to kind of hear hey, what you've done, what would you have done differently, and how do you think it would have impacted the business or the hiring. And often when you see that there's been that reflection, it's as useful as a positive example, because this person's learned, they actually are able to outline very clearly what they would do differently and how that would translate into impact. So for sure, if someone feels like, oh, I have a really good example but actually it didn't work out, I would still
Yeah.
suggest you share it, but share the learnings after, or maybe what you did differently next time, so that there's an opportunity to kind of see the learnings. Yeah.
So in theory, the process for anyone listening is going to be self-reflect, listen to the skills that you're identifying here, reach out to communities, reach out to your manager, just try and get a list full of, not necessarily skills that are in your day-to-day job, but skills that are around your job, those more softer skills, and then go back before you even start doing interviews, prepare ahead of time. Okay, where have I had shown proactiveness? Where have I shown critical thinking? And kind of then follow the same structures if you would with when your actual sourcing ability, your closing ability, and have like I guess a bank of preparation for soft skills and hard skills already in your mind that you can bring both of them forward to the discussion.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. If we're talking about interview preparation, for sure, do that. And just on the skill gap analysis, like this is a very simple way of doing it, right? You list these skills and then you say like
Yeah.
you think you're like developing or you're mastering, and then you can kind of jot down ideas on like how you could do this in your current role. And for the interviews, like preparation is key. And also thinking about like how do you showcase an example that is like indicative of your current scope, because sometimes the examples, they're like good examples, but they're not necessarily showcasing your scope as a like senior or the
Hmm.
complexity of the situation you handled. So also my suggestion in preparing is like think about like is this like one of the more complex examples that I've had to deal with, or maybe do I have something that showcases maybe that that expectation? This is for more like senior roles, of course, where the expectation, I think, and at least in my case, is you've dealt with more complex situations, more ambiguous scenarios, or your scope was larger than maybe just your roles. It was maybe like the team's roles or,
Mm.
the organization's process. So also kind of use that lens in terms of your preparation and which examples are going to showcase that scope and complexity. Yeah.
I think that kind of links back to the whole element of trying to be as adaptable as possible. If we put yourself in the title of a recruiter, you're typically finding and sourcing and closing. That's the role. But you've got so much more that's happening around you that you can kind of tap into. And I guess these skills that you're highlighting is like it's just you simply saying, "Hey, I'm more than just this. I can do a bit of this. I can do a bit of that. I can come and bring a lot of different elements of impact to insert whatever company is
Yeah.
here."
Yeah.
Do you obviously you've come from Amazon, right? A huge behemoth. Everyone knows them, right? So you've got probably, I don't know, thousands upon thousands of people to interview for one role, maybe. I don't know. And then with Moss, obviously, it's a startup, it's a growing company in a healthy position. Obviously, when you take these two wildly different companies, do you find that if I was coming to interview with you today, I should try and emulate or match my examples to where you are as a business today? Would that be a better situation? So I'm not going to talk about, if I did come from a business like Amazon, for example, I'm not going to start talking about these huge corporation projects that I've worked on. I'll try and bring in those smaller projects to you.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think there's a temptation to bring this like these beautiful huge projects that can take place in more corporate environments, where it takes you 6 months to roll out a new process, or you've worked on like a number of roles that have taken a year to fill, and they do show the level of ownership that you can have and
Mhm.
the impact in those environments, but they're not always super, I would say, impactful in smaller environment startups, where like the speed and the quick wins are almost more important than like the big transformation. So I would, balance these examples out. It doesn't mean you should ignore them, because some of these examples are very powerful, but think about how you adapt it to kind of the needs of the business. And honestly, I've had in some cases, recruiters say like, I have this kind of example where it was like a big transformation, or I have like this other example that was like we did things a lot faster, and it wasn't as big scope, but we got results within a few weeks, and then they can you can validate also with the interviewer like what's the best example.
Mhm.
That's like in my own experience something that I think is valuable, because you don't always know the exact expectations of a startup, and if it's your first interview, you may not know that like what we actually care about is like the impact you've had and like the
Mm.
speed. So sometimes like it's also worth just sense checking with the interview, and saying like, I have these different examples, like which one would you like to hear about? And then I can I can pick what's more relevant to what I'm looking for.
Does that also come into effect? And we're slightly off topic, still slightly on topic, so bear with me. Because obviously you had two wildly different experiences, Amazon and Moss. So does that also bleed into the element of the broader skills? Do you look for a different set of broader skills at Moss now than when you were obviously with the team at Amazon?
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, I think it's, it's reflective of the time we're in right now.
Yeah.
I'm sure Amazon looks for different kind of things now than it did when I was there like 4 years ago. So I'm sure it's evolved, but back then, it was very specific. It was like, have you been a sourcer, and have you hired like software development engineers, and
Mm,
high pace. So it was a lot more narrow because the role that you were coming into was very narrow, and there were no expectations that you would have to pivot because we were hiring hundreds of engineers. So
yeah.
we'll always need you to focus on this. And we were set up in a way that was very like that was meant for this high volume hiring. Whereas now, I think, whether it's a Moss or Amazon, we kind of know that things will change, and teams will get consolidated and rejigged, and so that adaptability is important. And I think things have probably changed there as well. But yeah, very different way of hiring for sure.
I think that kind of is just the future proofing element of talent acquisition for yourself now, like taking control of your career and say, look, skills today, what am I going to need in the future, and let's go start working on those. Celia, I really do appreciate you spending some time, because obviously I do understand as well that showcasing these are the sorts of things that you're looking out for as a hiring manager. Not every team wants to share this, so I do appreciate you being transparent and giving obviously our listeners an insight into the mind of an actual hiring manager in talent acquisition. Say, look, this is what I'm thinking is going to happen. This is what I'm looking for my team, and we can use this hopefully as a springboard of people who are, like I said, actively looking, open minded to looking, or simply just want to grow their skills. If
Yep.
someone wants to explore your team further, if someone wants to take the conversation further with you, where is the best place that they can find you?
I would say on LinkedIn. That's where you can find me. The roles are advertised as well, so people can apply directly. But yeah, LinkedIn is where I hang.
Very perfect. One day someone is going to tell me something other than LinkedIn, but not today.
Yeah,
We'll still
fingers
stick.
crossed. Fingers crossed, right?
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Have a lovely day.
Bye.